Hello everyone, welcome to this brief data tutorial in which I'll be going through how to convert or reshape repeated measures data from wide to long format using Excel. So let's start basic. What do we mean by wide or long format for repeated measures data? Well, they both simply refer to different ways of setting up a data file when it has repeated measures elements in it, whenever a participant contributes more than one data point. So starting with wide format, which is probably the more traditional way of setting up a repeated measures data file, or a data file that has any repeated measures elements in it. So in a wide format setup, each row represents a participant, and a participant will contribute several observations, several scores in that row. So in this data file here, each participant has contributed a score at 3 different time points, so time 1, time 2 and time 3. And this first row here gives you or shows you the data from participant 1, their time 1 score, their score at time 2 and their score at time 3, all in one row. Now in contrast, long data format presents that data a little bit differently. Here each row represents an observation on whatever that measure is. Each participant contributes a new row for each observation that they contribute. So for example, participant 1 scores at time 1, time 2 and time 3 each now get their own row. So these are the same data here. So participant 1, this is their time 1 score, their time 2 score and their time 3 score now. But now those values are all represented in one column, with an identifier variable here, which tells us that this is participant 1 score at time 1, participant 1 score at time 2, and at time 3, etc. So the reason for having those two different formats is that each of them suits different analysis options, different ways of approaching the analysis of repeated measures data. So for example, a repeated measures analysis of variance in most statistical packages will require your data to be in wide format. But if you want to analyze repeated measures data, for example, using mixed models, then your data will probably have to end up in long format in order to do that. So many of the data files that we get come to us, say if we've recorded data using some program or an online survey or whatever it might be, data sets often come to us in wide format. So what we want to look at today is how we convert or reshape our data from wide format into long format if we need to. And I'm going to go through one fairly easy option to do that for many different types of repeated measures data or data files using Microsoft Excel using their Power Query editor. Okay, so what I'm going to do is go through each of the example data sets from the repeated measures analysis lecture from SCI 3402. So let's start with a very simple example, a one-way repeated measures design with 2 levels. Here, this is a study in which we imagine participants are reporting or self-reporting their alcohol consumption at 2 different time points. They report their alcohol consumption at time 1 and then at time 2. Okay, so let's have a look at that. Okay, here's our data in wide format. So we have participant 1 contributing their self-report score at time 1 and at time 2. Okay. Now, the first thing we need to do before we do anything else is make sure that we have an identifier, a variable that tells us which participant is which. So what I'm going to do is insert a new variable. I'll just label it P for participant. And now what we want to do is give an identifier, basically number each of these participants from 1 to however many it might be. I'm going to tell you a quick and easy way of doing that, rather than typing in a number each time, because that can be quite time consuming if you have lots and lots of participants. So let's fill in the first row. Okay, this is going to be participant 1. Now I'm going to do a quick formula from then on. So I'm going to say that this next row is going to be the previous row plus 1. Okay, 2. Now, if I just highlight this cell, grab and click and hold this little square at the bottom and drag it all the way down to the bottom, it fills in the rest of the cells with that formula. Okay, so now we have participants labeled or numbered from 1 to 109. Now, just one further step here, because it's a formula. Okay, the value, it's not actually entered as a value, it's entered as a formula. So to make sure that we just have the value, what we want to do is select all of these values again. So what I'm doing here is highlighting the top cell. I'm going to press and hold Shift and Control and the down arrow key, and that selects all of those values. Now what I'm going to do is copy them and then paste them straight away, but paste them as values. Okay. Now if I click on cell, this value of 2 or 3 or 4, it's coming up as a value, not as a formula. Okay, and that's what we want. All right, so now we've got our identifier for participants. All right, next step, we need to highlight all of these data, okay, including the headers. So I'm going to drag this along. Again, I'm going to hold Shift and Control on a PC and the down arrow key. Just a very easy way of selecting all of these cases. Okay, now go to Data and select this option here from Table or Range. Okay, just confirm, make sure that this is ticked. My table has headers. Yeah. Okay, you might get a warning here because it connects to an external source. Just click on OK. Now this is the Power Query Editor window. All right. So what we'll see here is our data. We've got our participant identifier variable and the time 1 scores and the time 2 scores. Now what I'm going to do is select the time 1 and the time 2 scores. Okay, those two columns. I'm not selecting the participant column. I'm going to go to Transform and click on this option here, Unpivot Columns. So if I click on that, now what it has done is reshaped the data. So now we've got 2 rows for participant 1, okay, in which we have the time 1 score, and the second row gives us the time 2 score. Okay, so I'm going to go to the Home tab and click on Close and Load. Now this gives us a second little tab here. So these are the original wide format data, and in this new tab it's given us the long format data. Okay, just a couple of further adjustments. I'm going to change the name of this variable to time, which is a little bit more intuitive, and you can change the header for this variable to something a little bit more intuitive. So it was alcohol consumption, so I'm just going to call it alcohol. Okay, and there we have our data in wide format for this very simple design. So what about a slightly more complex design? So complex in the sense that we have more than 2 levels to our repeated measures element, but also perhaps we maybe have a between participants factor or variable in our design as well. So in this example, it's a 3x2 mixed design. So we've got 1 repeated measures variable, which has 3 levels. Again, it's alcohol consumption, measured this time at 3 different time points. But now we also have 1 between participants variable with 2 levels, whether participants are a member of a sports club or not. Okay, so let's have a look at that data in wide format and how we can reshape it into long format. Okay, just going to click on Enable Content. So just for ease and speed, I've entered a participant variable already. So we've got a participant identifier here already. Here we have the variable that codes whether they are a sports club member or not between participants, so they either are or aren't. And we have our 3 time points for each participant. So participant 1, their sports club membership, and their times 1, 2, and 3 scores. So again, I'm going to select all of that data. I'm just going to drag down this time, make sure it's all selected. Again, go to Data and select from table and range. Okay, so again, this is the Power Query setup. So now I want to select those three columns. So I'm holding down Shift here, clicking on the three headers, and that selects all three of those columns that we want to unpivot. Go to Transform and Unpivot Columns. And now we'll see that it's reshaped the data. So participant 1 is now contributing, has 3 rows, one for each of the data points that they contributed at the 3 time points. We have an attribute column which tells us that it was time point 1, 2 or 3, their score, but we also now have the sports club membership between participants variable also set up. Okay, so we know that participant 1, they were in this condition, or well, not this condition, but they were or weren't a member of a sports club. And if we scroll down, we can see that participant 18 was not a member of a sports club, okay, with their time 1, 2 and 3 data. So back to home, close and load that. Okay, and there we have it set up. Now we want to maybe relabel this as time and give this a more meaningful title. Okay, so there we go. That's a mixed design reshaped from wide to long format. Okay. Now back to a final example, which is a little bit more complex again, because it has not just one repeated measures variable, but 2 repeated measures variables. And in fact, it's a mixed design. So it has on top of that a between participants variable too. So it's a 2 by 2 by 2 mixed design. So it's got 2 repeated measures variables, each of which have 2 levels, and 1 between participants variable. Okay, so in this setup, the dependent variable is participants' performance on hand-eye coordination tasks. And the repeated measures variables are whether they did this sober or under the influence of alcohol, and also whether the tasks themselves were easy or difficult. So each participant did all 4 combinations of that. Also, the experimenters coded whether they were a sports person or not, so whether they did a sport that involved hand-eye coordination. Okay, so here we have a fairly complex sort of two repeated measures elements rather than 1, which was the case in the previous examples. So let's go to that and see it in wide format. Okay, just enable content. So this is the setup. So we've got our participant identifier here already. Okay, we've got the coding of the between participants variables, whether they are a sports person or not. And then in each row, we have each participant's 4 scores, 1 for each of the combinations of alcohol and task difficulty. All right. So again, first thing we want to do is just select all of the data, go to data, and from table or range. Okay. So first thing we want to do again is select each of the columns that contains repeated measures elements. Okay. Now don't worry too much that these actually represent 2 separate variables. Select all 4 of them. Go to Transform and Unpivot Columns. Okay. So now it has 4 values, 4 rows for participant 1, and this is their score in each of the 4 combinations of those 2 repeated measures variables. Let's go home and close and load that. And in this new tab, we have that long formatted data. All right, so we want to do a couple of other things first here, because this is not just 1 repeated measures variable, it's 2 separate repeated measures variables, and we want to actually have a code of those separately. So what I'm going to do is, first of all, I'm going to create 2 new columns in which I'm going to, which will represent each of the repeated measures variables. Okay, so this column is going to be the alcohol variable, or code the alcohol condition. And this one is going to code the task difficulty condition. Okay. So what I want to do first of all is select all of the data. Okay, so I'm just pressing and holding Shift and Control. Okay. And the downward arrow key, that selects everything. Now what I want to do is go to Data and Sort. And I'm going to sort it by this attribute variable here, first of all. Okay. Now the reason for that is, now that has organized all of the data according to whether they were in a particular condition. So this score comes from participant 1 in the easy task alcohol condition. Okay, so first of all I'm going to code that as alcohol. That was the alcohol condition. So we're basically pulling apart the information in this cell into two separate cells. So rather than alcohol easy, it's going to be the alcohol condition for the easy tasks. Okay. Now, because these are all in order, I can just click and hold, grab that little green square at the bottom there, and pull that down and populate the cells all the way down for all of the alcohol conditions. Then, okay, below that, we're moving into the control condition. Drag that down again. And that's populated the rest of the cells. Back up to the top. Now we're going to do it the same for the task variable. Okay, grab and hold this. Populate all the ones down to easy. So I'm going to stop here. Okay, because the next ones are hard tasks. Okay, so just grab that, drag it down. Oops, one more. There we go. The next set are easy tasks. And the final set are hard tasks. Let's grab that, drag it down. Okay. So scroll back up to the top. I'm just going to call this score, their alcohol score. Now, because we now have the coding for the two different repeated measured variables, okay, whether it was in the alcohol or the control condition, or the easy or difficult task condition, in theory we no longer need this variable. Now in your data set, feel free to leave it there, but if it would avoid confusion, it's possible to just get rid of it. So now we have the long format version of this fairly complex mixed design. Okay, so this was the wide version, and now this is the long version. I'm just going to sort the data again by participant so we can see that, just holding Shift and Control. Okay, make sure it's all selected. Go to Sort and sort it by participant value. Okay, and now we have participant 1's 4 scores, okay, in each of the combinations of alcohol and task difficulty. Their score in the alcohol easy condition, the alcohol hard condition, control easy condition, etc. And the same for all the other participants. Okay, so that is a quick run through of how to reshape different sorts of repeated measures, wide format sets into long format. Okay, I hope that's been somewhat useful. Thanks very much for watching, and yeah, take care.